I always thought betrayal had a sound, a door slamming, a glass breaking, a scream echoing down a hallway. But that night when I opened the door and saw them, there was only silence. My husband's back arched in panic, his face turning pale, words fumbling on his lips. And beside him, my daughter's best friend Emily, wrapped in a sheet, her eyes meeting mine, no shame. No fear, just a smile, that same soft sugar, sweet smile she always used when she came over for dinner, calling me Mrs. Carter. And that smile hurt more than anything else in the world. My name is Lena Carter, 42, wife of a man I thought I knew better than I knew myself, Daniel Carter, respected architect, charming husband, the kind of man who could light up any room. We had been married for 19 years. 19 years of inside jokes, morning coffee rituals, and carefully built trust. Our daughter Haley is 17, bright, artistic, beautiful, the kind of girl every mother dreams of raising. She brought Emily into our home 3 years ago. Emily, her best friend, her confidante. The girl who spent holidays with us when her parents were too busy. I remember the first time I met her, shy, polite, all soft curls and nervous laughter. She reminded me of Haley in so many ways. I never imagined she would one day be the reason my marriage collapsed. It started small, subtle. Daniel would linger when Emily was around, asking her about her college applications, complimenting her artwork, making jokes that felt just a bit too comfortable. I brushed it off. He was always friendly, and Emily seemed like a second daughter to him. But sometimes I'd catch a flicker in her eyes, something unreadable, a knowing glance that made me uneasy. I remember one evening vividly. I was setting the table for dinner when I overheard laughter from the living room. Daniel and Emily sitting close, laughing over something on his phone. Haley was upstairs, finishing her homework. When I walked in, they both looked up, startled, almost guilty. Daniel quickly stood. "Hey, honey, Emily was just showing me that meme." But Emily's smile lingered, that same soft curve that didn't reach her eyes. And for a moment, I felt something. A whisper of doubt. I told myself I was overthinking. That's what wives always tell themselves before the truth crushes them. Our home looked perfect from the outside. The freshly painted white fence, the blooming garden, the polite smiles for the neighbors. But inside, I began to notice cracks. Daniel's late nights at the office. His phone suddenly password locked. Perfume that wasn't mine on his shirts. Subtle, floral, too young. Once, I even found a lipstick mark on a coffee mug. I held it in my hands for a long time before washing it off. Denial was easier than confrontation, because if I asked, he'd lie, and I wasn't ready to hear him lie. That night, Haley was at her friend's house for a sleepover. Emily had come over earlier to pick up her sketchbook. She smiled when I handed it to her and said she might stay a bit to wait for Daniel. He promised to show me his new design portfolio. It sounded innocent. I wanted to believe it was, but hours later, when I realized Daniel still hadn't come home, a strange instinct pushed me to check. The lights in his studio were on. I remember my heart pounding as I walked down the hall, barefoot, the house too quiet. I pushed open the door, and there they were, Daniel's shirt half open, Emily's hair falling over her shoulders. Both frozen in the act. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just stood there numb as Emily turned to look at me, that same soft, practiced smile playing on her lips. That smile broke something in me I didn't know could break. I closed the door quietly, walked to the kitchen. Poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady, too steady, because something inside me had shifted. The kind of pain that doesn't explode, it calcifies, turns into something colder, sharper. I looked at our wedding photo on the counter and whispered, "You've both made a mistake you'll never forget." That was the night Lena Carter stopped being the trusting wife and became the woman who would burn her husband's double life to the ground, one smile at a time. If pain had a face, mine didn't show it. Not then. Not when I watched my husband and my daughter's best friend scramble for excuses dressed in guilt. Because sometimes silence is louder than any scream, and mine was deafening. I didn't confront them that night. I didn't throw things or demand explanations. I just turned, walked upstairs, and closed the door behind me. But after that moment, everything looked different. Every sound, every glance, every text message felt like another piece of evidence waiting to be seen. Looking back, the signs had been there for months. Little things, so small I almost pitied myself for missing them. It started with Daniel's sudden generosity toward Emily, a new art tablet for her birthday, a designer backpack when she got accepted into an art summer program. When I asked him about it, he said, "She's practically family, Lena. Her parents don't really care about her, I just want to help." I wanted to believe him, because believing him meant my marriage was still safe. Then came the calls, late, night ones that he'd answer in the hallway, voice hushed, pacing like a man carrying the weight of a secret. When I asked who it was, he smiled that effortless, dismissive smile. "Just work, honey. You know how deadlines get." But one night, curiosity outweighed dignity. I picked up his phone while he was in the shower. The message preview on the screen froze me cold. Can't stop thinking about last night. The number wasn't saved. And when I opened the thread, it was empty, deleted. Emily started visiting more often, even when Haley wasn't home. Just dropping something off, she'd say, her voice syrupy, eyes darting toward Daniel's study. Once, I came home early from the grocery store and found her sitting on the couch, laughing at something on his laptop. Her shoes were off, she looked comfortable, too comfortable. Daniel looked up, startled. "Hey, sweetheart, Emily was just helping me review the design sketches for her college portfolio." Her lips twitched into that now familiar smile, the one that said, "I know something you don't." My throat tightened, but I forced a polite nod. "That's sweet of you, Daniel. You're quite the mentor." Emily giggled softly, brushing her hair behind her ear, the same move I used to find endearing in Haley. Now it felt like mockery. The next sign wasn't emotional, it was financial. Bills started coming late. Credit card statements thicker than usual. Daniel brushed it off. Business expansion. He said, some new projects, some client dinners, nothing to worry about. But worry was all I did. Because every dinner receipt had 2 entrees and 2 glasses of wine. And once, when I checked the car's mileage, I realized he'd been driving to the east side of town, where Emily's art academy was located. The truth was starting to paint itself. I just wasn't ready to look at the full picture. I stopped sleeping properly. Every time he touched me, I felt like I was borrowing affection that didn't belong to me anymore. He'd say he loved me, but his eyes were somewhere else, distant, distracted, guilty. One evening, I was folding laundry when Haley walked in. "Mom," she said softly, "are you and Dad okay?" Her question hit me like a knife. I looked at her face, the same hazel eyes Daniel once said he fell in love with when they were mine. I smiled weakly. "We're fine, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" She hesitated. "It's just I don't know. Dad and Emily talk a lot. Like a lot. Sometimes when we hang out, he texts her too. She says he's just giving her advice, but it feels weird." My heart cracked. My daughter had noticed it too, but I couldn't let her see my fear. So I said the only thing a mother could in that moment. "I'll talk to him, honey. Don't worry about it." But I didn't talk to him, because if I asked and he confirmed what I feared, it would break Haley's heart before it even broke mine. The final red flag came 2 weeks before the night I walked in on them. Daniel came home late again, tie loosened, shirt slightly unbuttoned. He smelled faintly of vanilla and paint, not my perfume, but hers. He went straight to shower, and when I picked up his jacket to hang it, something fell out of the pocket. A sketchbook, Emily's sketchbook. I knew it was hers immediately. Her name was written on the first page, looping and playful. But what froze me wasn't her name. It was the drawing inside. A pencil portrait of a man, Daniel, shirtless, smiling. The kind of intimate detail you only capture when you've seen someone up close. The title written at the bottom said, Muse. I sat there, staring at it, until the tears started burning my throat. When he came out, I handed it to him without a word. His face drained of color. Where did you find that? In your jacket pocket. He swallowed hard, eyes flickering away. She must have left it in my office. I brought it home by mistake. A lie. I didn't call him out, not yet. Because sometimes patience is sharper than confrontation. That weekend, Emily came over again. I watched her from the kitchen window, laughing with Haley in the garden, like nothing was wrong. Daniel joined them later, handing Emily a drink, his hand brushing hers a second too long. I saw it. She saw me watching, and she smiled, that same haunting, perfect smile. Something inside me finally snapped. Not in anger, but in resolve. If he was truly betraying me, I wouldn't lose myself to rage. I'd find the truth quietly, methodically, because when you've been made a fool of in your own home, revenge isn't about shouting. It's about control. That night, I started keeping a journal, not of my pain, but of his patterns, receipts, calls, times. Every little inconsistency went into that notebook. I didn't know it yet, but those notes would one day become my weapon, the proof that would expose both of them for who they really were. For now, I just closed the page, whispered into the dark, keep smiling, Emily, keep smiling while you still can. They say when you're betrayed, you feel it before you see it. That's true. But what they don't tell you is how your mind starts fighting itself, how you begin to question every good memory, wondering which ones were built on lies. By the time I found the truth, my heart wasn't just broken. It was humiliated. The night after finding Emily's sketchbook, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smirking behind that innocent smile, Daniel's hand on hers, and my own reflection in the window, blind, trusting, pathetic. By 2 a.m., I made a decision. If he was cheating on me, I needed proof, real proof, so I started digging. Daniel's office was his sanctuary. He kept his blueprints, contracts, and private files in a locked drawer. But I knew where he hid the key taped under the second drawer of his desk. I'd seen him do it once years ago, back when I still believed secrets didn't exist between us. My hands trembled as I unlocked the drawer. Inside, 2 burner phones, receipts from a boutique hotel, one that charged hourly rates, and a velvet box containing a diamond necklace I had never seen before. I opened the box. The tag was still attached. On the tiny card inside, in his handwriting, "To my Muse, forever yours." I didn't need to guess who Muse was. My stomach turned. I felt cold, colder than I'd ever felt in my life. The next morning, Daniel acted normal, too normal. He kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work. Same routine, same voice, same man who'd promised me forever. I stared at him as he tied his tie, and all I could think about was how many times those hands had touched her. My daughter's best friend. When he left, I went to the laundry room. His shirt smelled like her perfume again, vanilla and paint. And just as I was about to lose it, my phone buzzed, a text message. "Hey, Mrs. Carter, just wanted to thank you for letting me spend so much time here lately. You've always treated me like family." There was a winking emoji at the end. That's when I realized she wasn't afraid of me. She wanted me to know. For days, I lived like a ghost in my own home. Haley thought I was sick. Daniel thought I was distant. Only I knew I was quietly watching the walls close in. Then one afternoon, I installed a small camera in Daniel's studio, the same one where he claimed to work on late-night designs. A simple black lens tucked between 2 books on his shelf. It didn't take long. 3 days later, I got an alert on my phone. Motion detected. I opened the feed, and there she was, Emily, in my husband's studio alone, wearing one of Daniel's shirts. She looked comfortable, humming softly while flipping through his sketches. Then Daniel entered, carrying coffee. He kissed her, full, shameless, practiced. My breath caught in my throat. Then I heard him say it, words I'll never forget. "You have no idea what you mean to me, Emily. You're my future. My future, not ours, not mine, hers." I sat frozen, my phone screen still glowing. They laughed together, whispered things I couldn't fully hear, but one sentence cut clear as glass. "She's getting suspicious." "Who, Haley?" Emily asked. "No," Daniel replied. "Lena." They laughed. "My husband and my daughter's best friend, laughing about me. That night I didn't eat, didn't sleep. Didn't even cry because something inside me hardened. For a week I played along, made breakfast, packed lunches. Pretended everything was fine, because pretending gave me time, but Daniel began to change. He grew careless, forgetting to hide his phone, forgetting which lies he'd already told. One night as he showered, a message appeared on his phone. "Can't wait till we don't have to sneak anymore." I clicked on it. The contact name was just a single emoji, artist palette of course, her art, her disguise. My throat tightened as I scrolled through their chat. Dozens of messages, plans to run away, talk of a fresh start after graduation. He'd promised to leave me for her. And the worst part, the messages went back almost a year. A year of lies, smiles, and stolen moments under my roof. 2 days later, Haley came home from school early. She looked pale, shaken. "Mom, did Dad ever mention anything about Emily lately?" I froze. "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Because people at school are talking. Someone saw them together holding hands at the cafe near the academy. I didn't have to ask who told her. Gossip spreads fast in small towns." I tried to steady my voice, and what do you think? Haley's eyes filled with tears. "I told them they were lying, that Dad would never do that, not with her." That broke me, because even as my daughter defended him, she was defending the man destroying our family. I hugged her tightly, whispering, "It's going to be okay." But inside, I knew it wasn't, not anymore. That night, I watched the footage again. I wanted to be sure, to leave no room for doubt. Daniel's hands on Emily's waist. Her laugh, his whisper, "I'll tell Lena soon." I hit pause. The frame froze on Emily's face, that smile again, satisfied, cruel, triumphant. The same smile she gave me the night I caught them. That's when the rage finally came, hot, violent, consuming. I slammed the laptop shut, nearly knocking it off the desk. My pulse roared in my ears. He had taken my trust. She had taken my home, and together, they had taken my peace. But what they didn't know was that I had everything I needed to destroy them both. The next morning, I served breakfast like nothing happened. Daniel smiled, poured his coffee, kissed my cheek. "Big presentation today," he said casually. "Wish me luck." I met his eyes. "Good luck, darling." My voice didn't shake. My smile didn't falter, because behind that calm expression, I had already made my decision. I wasn't just going to expose him. I was going to make sure his entire world collapsed piece by piece, just like mine did. And as for Emily, her smile had won the first round, but I was done being silent. Now it was my turn to smile back. For 2 weeks after I found the footage, I wore my calm like armor. It protected me from impulse, from violence, from words I might later regret. But armor can rust when it's left on a hook for too long, and grief is an acid that eats through the strongest metal. Every morning I smiled at the mirror and practiced the expression I would show the world. Composed, unfazed, a woman who still had everything under control. Every night when the house fell quiet, I fed the flame that burned under that calm. I cataloged receipts. I time-stamped footage. I mapped patterns like a cartographer of betrayal. Still, there was a part of me that wanted to break, just once, so the pieces would make sense. I wanted to scream, to throw dishes, to tear down their pictures until the plaster bled. But I held myself back. I had a plan, and plans demand patience. The trigger wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a confrontation, or a public humiliation, or even an overheard confession. It was smaller, crueler, a single afternoon that made everything unbearably real. I'd been out running errands, my notebook tucked under my arm with my carefully logged evidence. When I returned, the house felt different, lighter in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. I hung my coat and heard laughter coming from the garden. Haley was there, sprawled on the blanket with sketch pads and colored pencils. Emily was beside her, animatedly showing her something. Daniel stood a little apart, hands in his pockets, watching them. I watched too. At first, I thought the scene was ordinary, a father spending time with his daughter and her friend. But then Haley reached up to show her sketch to Daniel, and he leaned in, ruffling her hair, the same way he used to ruffle mine when I was a child. Haley smiled, grateful, unaware. Then Emily caught my gaze. She didn't hide. She looked right at me and lifted her hand in a slow, casual wave. But it wasn't the friendly wave of a guest. It was the wave of someone who knew victory was already theirs. It was the smile that had haunted me since the day I opened that door. It was a deliberate, practiced curve of lips that said, "I own this moment too." That small motion, a triumph disguised as politeness, was the moment something inside me broke cleanly and without sound. I felt the world tilt, not toward panic, toward clarity, sitting on the back steps with the warm late afternoon sun on my shoulders. I realized I had been doing revenge wrong. For 2 weeks I'd been collecting evidence like a shaken detective, letting anger be the engine, but anger alone is messy. It destroys indiscriminately. I didn't want blind destruction. I wanted justice, precise, undeniable, and irreversible. I thought of Haley's face when she defended him at school. I thought of the way Daniel had kissed Emily and whispered a future that excluded us. I thought of how Emily had smiled at me, like a lesson already learned. The decision didn't arrive as a roar. It crept in as a cold, meticulous certainty. If they were going to tear our family apart, they would learn what happens when someone they hurt becomes the architect of their ruin. I stood up, palms pressed to the wooden railing, and made a vow. I would not be made small. I would not be erased from my own life. I would take everything they knew about me, the trust, the routine, the complacency, and turn it into the scaffolding for their undoing. The plan had to be simple enough to execute and tight enough that there was no room for them to wiggle free. It had to use the things they were careless with: their arrogance, their secrets, their assumptions that I was weak. First, control the narrative. If whispers starting in school or town would protect them, then I would become the one who spoke loudest, but with facts. Evidence, carefully timed disclosures, not cruelty for cruelty's sake, but consequences. Second, cut the oxygen. Daniel's work was built on reputation. If I could undermine that slowly, publicly, he would lose the kind of support that money couldn't buy. Contracts, clients, friends who were colleagues on the edge of rumors. Those were the things that would crack him professionally, not in a way that made him a cautionary tale, but in a way that left him exposed. Third, protect Haley. She was the axis of this life. I could not let her be collateral. She would be shielded from the fallout as much as possible, but also prepared so when the truth came, she would stand on solid ground, not shock. And fourth, make Emily uncomfortable in the only place she truly belonged, our home. Her smile depended on the comfort of our roof, on the softness of a family that had embraced her. I would make our home neutral ground again, a place where she would feel watched, measured, and unwelcome. That night I went to bed without anger fluttering in my chest. It had been replaced by workmanlike focus. You could see the change in small ways. I reheated his coffee and added sugar extra strong. I began to answer his lies with a smile that contained 1,000 questions. When he kissed me, I kissed back with the same tenderness he had always expected, but with eyes that catalogued and remembered. I scheduled a meeting with Daniel's biggest client under the guise of a friendly catch-up. I started talking casually to his colleagues at neighborhood gatherings, asking harmless questions. I let my presence at community events be conspicuous, the perfect cover for a woman who was everywhere and nowhere suspicious. People trust what they see often. I also began to leave subtle breadcrumbs for Haley little conversations about what trust looks like, about how even kind people can make devastating mistakes. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, but I gave her the tools to ask the right questions when the walls finally fell. And late at night, while the house slept, I edited the footage, cropping, labeling, securing copies to a USB drive I hid in the false bottom of the jewelry box. Evidence, I reminded myself, not vengeance. By morning, I was different in ways that surprised me. The woman who had once measured her life in coffee spoons and shared calendars had learned to measure by opportunity. The grief that had nearly swallowed me had hardened into resolve. When Daniel left for work, he kissed me with the same practiced warmth and said, "Love you." I watched him walk to the car and realized with a strange, bitter gratitude that he had done me a favor. He had exposed his weakness. He had shown me the chink in his armor. He had made me, without meaning to, into the exact kind of person he had underestimated. I smiled then, not the small, practiced smile of a wife, but the thin, steady one of someone who had found their center in the eye of a storm. The revenge would not be loud. It would be inevitable. And in the quiet that followed as the house settled into its usual hum, I wrote 3 words in my notebook at the top of a fresh page. Revenge, I learned, is just like architecture. The very thing Daniel built his life on. You needed a foundation, a plan, and the patience to let gravity do the work. Only this time, I was the architect. I had the footage, the sketchbook, the receipts, and the messages. What I didn't have at first was the right way to turn those things into ruin. So I made a plan step by step, precise, legal where necessary, ruthless where it mattered. This is what I did. You don't expose a life without a ledger. I copied everything. Every video file from the hidden camera was exported, labeled, and duplicated. Each copy went to a different place, an encrypted cloud folder, a USB hidden in the false bottom of the jewelry box, an email draft saved as a backup to be sent automatically should anything happen. To me, receipts were scanned hotel invoices, dinner bills, the boutique tag with the handwritten note. I took photographs of the sketchbook pages and transcribed the messages from Daniel's burner phone. Each item got a timestamp, a short note, where it was found, why it mattered. Then I did something practical and smart. I made a list of plausible deniability points Daniel and Emily could use. For each, I assembled evidence to close the loophole. If he claimed work meeting, I had the hotel's hourly charges. If Emily claimed mentor relationship, I had the messages that said, "You're my future." I also recorded my own memories, short voice, memos of dates and conversations Haley had mentioned, and the times I'd noticed perfume or missing money. These weren't dramatic confessions. They were context for the facts, metadata that would make denial harder to live behind. I'm not reckless. I am calculated. So I quietly sought counsel. A friend recommended a family lawyer, someone who knew how to handle infidelity cases that bled into reputational harm. I booked a confidential consultation under the pretense of updating our will. I walked in with just enough information to worry a professional, but not enough to light fires prematurely. The lawyer's eyes narrowed when I laid out receipts and the transcribed messages. "You should keep everything exactly as it is," she said. "We'll draft a preliminary letter to protect assets and prepare for formal disclosure if you choose to proceed. And very important, don't destroy evidence." That last part was a bomb. I nodded, and with her help, I set legal levers in place. A heart-shaped lock on our accounts not yet activated, a written record of my discoveries in her office, and a timeline that would serve me in court if needed. Legal protection made me feel less like a woman plotting revenge, and more like a patient general preparing siege engines. People believe what they read first. If whispers formed before I spoke, Daniel's side would shape the story. I needed to be the first to seed truth calmly, strategically, and with undeniable proof. I made a list of players who could inflict the most damage. Daniel's top client who loved integrity, his project manager a man who idolized reputation, and a prominent colleague who had quietly competed with him for years. I scheduled chance encounters, coffee at a neighborhood cafe, an after-church fundraiser, a charity mixer where I would be seen, casual and composed, speaking with them about work matters and concerns. Nothing accusatory, only questions, small musings about trust and distraction in leadership. Each conversation was a breadcrumb. I mentioned a few odd receipts and late night studio hours, enough to plant curiosity in the right ears. Those ears were hungry for scandal, the way dry tinder is hungry for flame. Traps are less about snares and more about architecture of choice. I arranged for Daniel to present a major pitch to his biggest client, the one that could keep his facade up for months. He was excited and nervous, the way men become when ego and profit mix. The client's trust was the single beam holding up his world. So I did two things. First, I volunteered to host a small clients and families evening at our house, an innocent, neighborly event where Daniel would feel praised and on display. I made sure the client he depended on would be there. I didn't reveal why I wanted him there. I only said it would be good for networking. Second, I left a subtle trail, a printed, anonymous letter, enclosed with a scanned image of one of the hotel receipts, arrived at the client's office with no return address. The letter was factual, stark, and curated to do one thing: make the client look for more, not accuse, not inflame, just enough to trigger curiosity. I also created small pressure points at Daniel's firm, a series of casual remarks to his project manager about the importance of transparency, and a few carefully timed questions to the colleague who disliked him. Rumors, once started, spread faster than denials. People make mistakes when they feel watched. So I turned our house into a place where comfort evaporated. I was polite to Emily, too polite. I invited her to help with a community gallery showing Haley had been selected for. I praised her in front of neighbors. I complimented her art in a way that sounded sincere, but that had an edge. You do love the dramatic, don't you? I always admired that about you. In private, I froze out little comforts. Daniel's shirts were always laundered but slightly starched. His favorite chair was accidentally moved. I asked for receipts at dinner. I answered his questions with questions. The point wasn't cruelty. It was to let their confidence fray. Emily, for all her practiced smiles, began to look smaller in our rooms. She started choosing different outfits, avoiding eye contact, leaving earlier. Daniel grew jitter, late to meetings, distracted, the phone, checking turning into phone, flinging when it didn't ring. They still acted in public like rulers of our small kingdom. They felt in control. That arrogance was an advantage. People who feel secure tend to make bolder mistakes. Nothing was worth this if Haley was collateral damage. So I arranged a conversation with her, not to confess everything but to give her context. We sat on her bed with mugs of tea. I asked her what trust looked like, what boundaries meant, and how secrets can look like kindness. I taught her simple things, what to ask when something felt wrong, and that she could come to me with anything without fear. I also prepared a soft truth, a pared-down version of events to tell her if the public unraveling came sooner than expected. She needed a foundation of reality, not the shock of spectacle. Through it all, Daniel and Emily wore confidence like armor. They continued to dote in public, dinner parties, PTA meetings, the neighbor's barbecue. Daniel kissed my hand in front of friends and laughed with colleagues as if nothing hung over him. Emily flashed that same God-forsaken smile, casual and triumphant. They believed they were untouchable. They believed their smiles would outshine any whispers, And that belief is dangerous because it makes people careless. On the eve of the pitch, I sat with my notes, my USB drives, and my lawyer's phone number. I had arranged the next day's timing down to minutes. The client was curious. His assistant had confirmed the anonymous inquiry, had reached him. The project manager had a sudden need for a detailed reconciliation of expenses for Daniel's team. At dinner, Daniel raised his glass and toasted to new opportunities. He smiled at Emily across the table, and she smiled back the same slow, rehearsed curl that had started this ruin. I lifted my glass and met his eyes. My smile was different now. Calm, patient, inevitable. To honesty, I said, and the house hummed with the sound of forks clinking against plates. They still thought they were in control. They did not know the client's assistant would open a folder at the pitch meeting and find a scanned receipt leading straight back to Daniel's office. They did not know the USB in my pocket held the video of a man who had promised forever, then whispered otherwise. The trap was set. The architect had done her work. The day felt like a thunderhead waiting to break. The kind of gray, brittle morning that promises a storm and delivers ruin. I dressed carefully, as if clothes could change the way truth looked. A dark dress, sensible heels, hair pulled back, businesslike, invisible. I carried nothing but my purse, my phone, and the small leather folder that held the copy of the hotel receipt I had sent anonymously the night before. Daniel left with a clipped kiss, confidence like armor. He did not know the soft little knife in my pocket. It was sharper than his best suit. The pitch took place in a glassed conference room downtown. Daylight poured over Daniel as he stood before the client. The man who could keep his company afloat or let it fall. The room smelled of espresso and expensive cologne. Daniel smiled, clicked through slides, his voice smooth, practiced. He pointed to renderings, to projected budgets, to teams and timelines. He talked about integrity and vision. He used words like legacy and trust. The irony stung like steam. I sat at the back, a neutral face among industry peers and investors. I watched his mouth move. I watched the client's hand tap the table, thoughtful, polite. Then, at a pause, the client's assistant stood and walked to the front with a manila envelope. He held it with 2 fingers like a bomb, for transparency. He said, voice steady, "We received this last night, anonymous." He slit the flap and pulled out a photocopy. A hotel receipt with a name redacted and a timestamp. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled like a gust. Daniel's smile faltered. He didn't step forward. Instead, he froze as though watching an out-of-body scene. The project manager swallowed, color draining. The client frowned. The expression of a man who had always believed business was a clean trade. He set the copy down and asked straightforwardly, "Daniel, care to explain?" Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. His answers came thin and fast, the way wet paper tears. "It's a misunderstanding," he said. "Someone, an old vendor, must have mixed receipts. I can." His voice broke on the last word. The client's hand went to his phone. "We're scheduling an audit," he said. "Immediate." There was a pause as the magnitude of the moment landed in the room like a weight. Daniel's colleagues exchanged glances. Reputation is a fragile architecture. One misplaced stone, and the whole thing can tumble. But that paper was only the first click in a lock I had turned a long time ago. The assistant's hand disappeared into the envelope again and produced another sheet, a printed link. "A web address. We were sent this link to a video," he said. He didn't know it was my hand that had uploaded that file, encoded and time-stamped, to a private cloud the night before. He didn't know I had arranged for this moment. He didn't know I had arranged for them to play it. There was a collective intake of breath as the assistant typed the address into the client's laptop and hit enter. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. The video began. At first it was the mundane. The studio, the sketches, Daniel's bookshelves. Then Emily, dusk in her hair, slipping on one of Daniel's shirts as if it fit her soul. Then Daniel coming in with coffee, their small talk, the kiss that was neither quick nor accidental. The camera lingered on the way his fingers brushed her face, the kind of touch that belongs to lovers, not friends. Then the whisper, "You're my future." The sound of the room changed. Forks clinked against plates in a nearby lunchroom. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." A man in the corner muttered something about integrity. Daniel's face went white. He looked smaller, exposed, the armor stripped away. Emily's smile. Once my torment flickered on the screen, then faltered. It looked rehearsed in the bright light, like a mask melting. The manila envelope had made the anonymous accusation. The video made it undeniable. I felt the room tilt, the way a camera pans too slowly. The client closed his laptop with a thud. He looked at Daniel like a man betrayed by a product he once trusted. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, barely audible. "Lena. This isn't Lena. My name landed in the air like a verdict." The client's voice was cool, clinical. "We cannot move forward while this is unresolved." He glanced at the project manager. "We will require an immediate internal audit. Pending findings, we will suspend payments and reevaluate our commitments." The words were pragmatic, merciless. Contracts severed quietly can be as devastating as public accusations. The fallout was immediate. Phones buzzed. Emails came like gunfire. Within hours, Daniel's firm was on a defensive foot. Clients asking for clarification, partners requesting meetings, whispers becoming a chorus. The office that had been a place of confident strides turned into a corridor of slumped shoulders and rehearsed apologies. But the public exposure was only part of the storm. News travels fast in a small town. A colleague posted a cautious line on social media about leadership and integrity, and within the day, the post had a ripple of comments: neighbors, parents from Haley's school, acquaintances. Someone uploaded a short clip of the video to a local forum. By evening, the headline across the community thread read, "Affair with teen's friend." I watched the notifications on my phone like a surgeon watches a monitor. My face was calm, unmoved, yet inside the precise, cold architecture of my plan hummed with satisfaction. At home, it unfolded like a slow-motion film. Haley called me crying, voice high with fear and betrayal. I listened. I held her through the phone and told her what she needed in measured tones. The bare truth, softened and scaffolded. "You are not to blame," I told her. "You never were." She sobbed. I sat in my kitchen and breathed with her, keeping my own edges intact. Daniel came home that night as if the floor had fallen away beneath him. He was a man whose livelihood hung by a thread. He wanted to talk, to explain, to bargain. I let him speak until his words frayed. He begged, pleaded, promised everything he had never given. He called me by pet names he hadn't used in months. He tried to touch my hand. I withdrew as if burned. Emily's reaction was smaller, but no less telling. She called Haley casual, then angry when Haley recoiled. She texted Daniel demanding a plan, an escape route, declarations of defiance disguised as love notes. Where her smile had once been practiced triumph, now there were Fisher's nervous typos, messages sent and deleted, attempts at damage control that only revealed panic. By the end of the night, the firm had frozen accounts. The client had pulled funding. A board member called to arrange a meeting for the next day. The local forum had dozens of comments. Haley's friends had started to text her, offering support and asking painful questions. I stood in my living room, the house around me suddenly too loud. The revenge had worked, precise, inevitable, and devastating. But when I closed my eyes, the victory felt hollow in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't the roar of triumph I'd imagined. It was the slow, empty echo of a life rearranged. I had taken a ruin and made it their ruin. They had lost status, clients, the cozy illusion that let them smile without consequence. But the hardest part was just beginning, because once the house of cards fell, decisions would have to be made. by lawyers, by neighbors, by my daughter. And some questions wouldn't be answered by evidence alone. What would Haley choose when the dust settled? What would justice look like when it wasn't just public humiliation, but legal claims in custody and the long, slow rebuilding of trust? I breathed and opened my notebook. At the top of the page, beneath the neat heading Aftermath, I wrote one word: silence has a sound when a storm ends. It's not peace. It's the hum that comes after everything collapses. That's what my house felt like 2 weeks after the video broke. Daniel had moved out, carrying only a suitcase and a look of disbelief that still didn't understand how his world had turned to ash. The firm he'd built was bleeding clients by the hour. His biggest investor pulled funding. His license was suspended pending investigation for professional misconduct. And Emily, my daughter's best friend, the girl who used to sit at my table and call me Miss Lena, was now a headline. The school expelled her quietly under the phrase for community well-being. Her parents left town 3 days later, unable to look anyone in the eye. The art scholarship she'd bragged about was revoked. They had burned themselves, and all I did was hold up the mirror. For a while, the silence in the house was unbearable. Haley barely spoke. She moved like a ghost school room sleep. Some nights I could hear her cry, muffled under her pillow. I wanted to take all that pain from her, but some lessons you can't teach through words. They carve themselves into your bones. One evening she came into my room. She looked older, eyes swollen, hands shaking a little. "Mom," she whispered, "you knew all along, didn't you?" I didn't answer immediately. Then I nodded. I knew enough. She sat on the bed beside me, staring at her hands. I hate her, and him. But mostly, I hate that I didn't see it. I turned to her and said softly, "Seeing isn't the same as knowing. Some people wear masks so well, they start believing them." We stayed like that for a long time, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Later, she added something I'll never forget. "Thank you for not letting them win." That night, I cried not from grief, but from release. Daniel tried to salvage his image. He held a press interview, claiming the video was deeply personal, and that it had been manipulated by private revenge. But truth doesn't die easily when proof exists. The recording was verified, and the receipts matched his company expenses. His investors filed civil claims. The professional board launched an ethics review. His project manager resigned publicly, citing irreconcilable differences in leadership values. Every door he'd ever walked through with arrogance now closed with quiet finality. He called me one last time. I almost didn't answer. When I did, his voice was broken glass. "Lena, I made a mistake." I said nothing. "I've lost everything," he continued. "You've made sure of that." I breathed once, steady. "No, Daniel, you made sure of that. I just stopped cleaning up your mess." He didn't reply. The line went quiet, then cut off. That was the last time I ever heard his voice. 3 months later, the air in our house smelled like fresh paint. I'd redone the living room, new curtains, a lighter color on the walls. Haley helped choose them. It wasn't about decorating, it was about reclaiming space. Neighbors had gone from whispers to empathy. Some avoided eye contact. Others brought casseroles and apologies disguised as food. But I didn't need their pity. I had clarity now, cold, clear, and priceless. I returned to work. My designs began winning bids again, smaller ones at first, then bigger. My boss, who'd once overlooked me in meetings because Daniel was the better name, now introduced me to clients as our most precise mind. Irony can be its own kind of justice. Haley started therapy. She joined an art class with new friends. Her teacher told me she paints in deep colors, shadows, and light colliding on canvas. Healing, it turns out, doesn't happen in silence. It happens in strokes, in color, in creation. 6 months later, the court finalized our divorce. I didn't ask for alimony. I didn't want his money, just freedom. The judge's verdict was clean and simple. Full custody to me, house retained, assets divided per agreement. But the last sentence of the judgment carried more satisfaction than any revenge could. The court finds no fault in the petitioner's actions following discovery of infidelity. No fault. 2 words after everything, that was my absolution. Daniel's reputation never recovered. He moved to another city under a freelance license, taking small drafting jobs under pseudonyms. Emily disappeared from public circles. Last I heard, she was waitressing under a different name in another province. And me? I rebuilt quietly, without apology, without rage. Just purpose. One evening, Haley and I attended her art exhibition. On one of the walls hung a piece titled Smile. It showed 2 faces, one of a young girl smiling, the other of a woman standing behind her, broken yet watching. The smile wasn't joyful, it was haunting, beautiful but hollow. Haley said softly, "It's how I saw her the day you told me the truth." I nodded, throat tight. The gallery curator approached us, saying the piece had drawn the most attention that evening. "It's the emotion," she said. "You can feel the betrayal and strength at once." I looked at my daughter, stronger, steadier, unbroken. The kind of girl who would never let someone else's lies define her again. That was my real revenge. Not the exposure, not the headlines, not the ruined man. But her healing. Weeks later, I received an anonymous envelope. No note, no return address. Inside was a photograph of Daniel, sitting alone at a diner, head in hands, next to a newspaper folded to an article about his suspension. On the back of the photo, in handwriting that looked shaky and bitter, were 4 words, "Was it worth it?" I smiled, folded it once, dropped it in the fireplace. The flames caught the edges, curling them into ash. Yes, I whispered to no one. It was worth every second. Then I turned away, not from hate, but from closure, because revenge isn't about destruction. It's about restoration, about giving pain a purpose. And in the quiet that followed, for the first time in years, I felt free. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, someone who smiled at you while stabbing you in the back, remember this. You don't have to destroy them to win. You only have to stop carrying their fire in your hands. Let them burn in the flames they built you. You rebuild in the light they can't stand anymore. Speech balloon, tell me in the comments. Have you ever trusted someone who broke you this way? How did you rise from it? Bell subscribe for more truths. Dial revenge stories, stories where pain turns into power, and justice feels like poetry.